I've known that my master is genuinely a good guy.
Reigen Arataka is a complicated person. He's charming, funny, and fiercely loyal, even going as far as to put himself in danger to help the people closest to him. But he's equal parts entrepreneurial, being willing to do insane things just to feed the hunger for success, including lying to the people around him with ridiculous explanations to justify the claims he makes about himself and his business, leading to some absolutely bizarre and wonderful sequences of increasingly absurd bluffs. However, what's much darker are the downright atrocious acts Reigen is willing to commit just to continue living life as a spiritual gunman. Despite all of this, he is an extremely well-loved character, both in-universe and in the show's fandom. I myself think he is great, both in terms of effective character writing and in terms of just being lovable through being charismatic and entertaining to watch. I want to take a moment to point out that while this video will largely be criticising Reigen, it is by no means just an excuse to express hate towards him, but rather to use him as an opportunity to talk about morality, explore Reigen's character, and try to pick out any valuable lessons. The question we have is this. In episode 7 of season 2, Mob tells Reigen that he is a genuinely good guy, but to tell a man who regularly does horrible things that he's a good person seems bizarre. What's going on here? Has Reigen fooled Mob into believing he's a better person than he really is? What exactly is it that leads Mob to claim that Reigen isn't indeed a good guy? Is the claim justified, and what can we learn from it? The only real starting point here is to explain what morality even is. I'm going to be keeping this brief, as I know a lot of people aren't massively interested in this sort of thing. Here's everything you need to know for this video in under 1 minute. Go. Morality refers to the distinction between acts that are good and acts that are bad. Good actions typically mean things which help others, such as returning a lost wallet. And when we talk about bad, we typically mean doing things which hurt others, such as kicking someone in the shins for no reason. We have to consider both intention and outcome when judging if an action is good or bad. The reason for this is complicated, and I'll leave a post in the comments explaining it, but for now just trust me on this. For this video I'm going to be using the following logic. A good person is someone who primarily does good things with good intentions, while a bad person is someone who often does things with bad intentions, or who creates needlessly bad outcomes. Obviously everyone can and normally will do a mixture of good and bad things, but when talking about a person's overall morality I'm going to base it off of which of these types of actions they do more often, as well as how significant those actions are. Some other important questions that I won't discuss here but would like to talk about in future videos are the following. A lot happens in this show, a ridiculous amount really. I could talk through everything Reigen does and explain my view on the moral significance of each action, but this video would be unbearably dull. So I'm going to quickly talk through only a few of the things Reigen does which I think are really good and a few which I think are really bad, talking about intents and results for each. But before that I need to give an important disclaimer. Morality is very personal. The views I'll be giving are based on my feelings rather than anything objective, and I will also be pushing a narrative. In other words, everyone has different views for how good or bad an action is, and that's okay. I will be pushing my personal views on how good or bad Reigen's actions are, with quick justifications, although there is no reason to believe my own views are superior to anyone else's. I strongly encourage people to voice their disagreements in the comments along with justifications as for why. Anyway, let's get on with the video. There are times where Reigen does things which are straight up wonderful. One which comes to mind is telling Mob that he doesn't have to fight at the end of season 1. He does this because he knows that Mob would have deep regrets over fighting her, and in doing so it allows Mob to trust Reigen to deal with it instead. And not only does Reigen deal with it, but he also helps the Everclaw members to realise how immature they're being, which allows them to move on as people and become much more respectable. This goes about as well as anyone could hope, and it's one of the main times Reigen's intentions are truly incredible, although arguably he was being reckless considering how dangerous the situation actually was. There are also times where Reigen's entrepreneurial life is not in danger by doing good things, and in these cases he's very willing to do things for people's sake. For example, in season 2 episode 3, Mob is hesitant to exorcise a peaceful family of ghosts, and as the clients would be none the wiser if the ghosts were exorcised or not, he decides to relieve Mob of the duty by lying to the clients about the ghosts being exorcised. Reigen's reason for this is that he recognises Mob's discomfort and doesn't want to put him through the situation, and as there's no real downside to stopping Mob here, he's very happy to make sure that Mob doesn't have to go through with it. While Reigen does lie to his clients, which isn't exactly the best thing morally, ultimately things go well here. We also shouldn't ignore Reigen's tendency to do really good things with really bad intentions, such as when young Mob came to him looking for advice. He does offer Mob some advice, which he seems to make up on the spot in an attempt to make Mob go away. However, this advice is what Mob really needs to hear. Essentially being that Mob can live in spite of his psychic powers as they are only a part of him, which can largely be ignored if he puts effort into developing other aspects of himself. Of course Reigen's intentions here are pretty underwhelming, but the results are brilliant, so morally speaking we have to give him some credit, especially considering that Reigen could have just closed the door on Mob rather than giving him any advice at all. Most of the time when Reigen does good things it follows this paradigm: bad intentions with great results, meaning that he has a surprisingly good track record. I've mentioned Reigen's good acts to create a fuller picture of him as a person, but the more important thing here are the times Reigen does despicable things. I mentioned child labour at the start of this video, but it's something that really needs to be brought up again. Reigen employs a 14-year-old child into his business as its key feature, and also pays a really bad rate of 300 yen, which is considerably lower than minimum wage at any point in the last 10 years. Reigen does supplement Mob's work with valuable life advice, but it doesn't change the fact that children really shouldn't be put through work positions, seeing as it's very possible it could affect their development in any number of ways, particularly as the work is extremely dangerous, even though Mob can handle pretty much all of it. Ultimately, Reigen's goal here is to improve his business, and child labour really isn't an excusable way to do so. I think this situation goes to show just how prominent Reigen's entrepreneurial side is over his moral side. And to show this again, we can consider how Reigen's whole business is based on a scam. It fundamentally works with him lying to and deceiving his customers. And while pretty much all of his customers leave satisfied, it's important to keep in mind that Reigen is charging people a high price for a service he's often not providing, working more as a machiav than a spiritual healer. Another key element here is that Reigen tries multiple times to stop Mob's emotional growth in both the early parts of Season 1 and the midpoint of Season 2. Reigen responds both times by telling him to give up on it, either as he doesn't believe it's possible for Mob to grow in the first case, and in the second case he realizes that the only way to stop Mob from growing is to make up lies about him being taken advantage of, or about his friends not actually caring about him, while also trying to guilt trip Mob into continuing to help him with his business. The reason for this is simple. If Mob leaves his employment, Reigen's business will likely fail, as he will no longer be able to properly provide his service. Reigen obviously has his own self-interest in mind, and this ultimately ends up hurting Mob in their relationship, but fortunately things essentially go back to normal in both cases afterwards. There are many times Reigen does horrible things to the people around him in his own self-interest, and often the times where he does good things are also based in his own self-interest as well. Like I said before, Reigen has two main sides: the part of him that cares about people around him, and his entrepreneurial side. Both of these sides can be prevalent depending on the situation, but ultimately he is normally dominated by his entrepreneurial side, which often comes at the expense of the people around him. This isn't all that strange for a person to be, it's very normal really, but I don't think Reigen can reasonably be called a genuinely good guy based on the things he does to others. And while he could take the position that Reigen is a good person deep down, and not be entirely wrong, it's undeniable that his good side really comes into play, and really a diamond buried in a mountain of turd is still an unpleasant proposition. Reigen Arataka is not a good person. However, we are all capable of change. In episode 6 and 7 of Season 2, Reigen's attempts to stunt Mob's personal growth leads to them splitting apart. After this happens, Reigen works hard and achieves new heights of success, only to then be exposed to fraud and destroyed by the press, losing everything he worked towards. He then holds a press conference to try and save face, and when he is asked why he started working as a psychic, Reigen comes to realize something. He had intended to close down his business until Mob showed up at his door to ask for help. I'm going to remind you here that Reigen chose to take Mob on as an apprentice to take advantage of his spiritual abilities, but it's clear that at some point along the way, Reigen did genuinely start to care about Mob and hold him in high regard. He ends his press conference by saying this: "You've grown up so much, you know that?" Directly to Mob, proving that despite all the awful things he has said and done to Mob, he does genuinely care about him as a person. After his character arc, Reigen shows a marked improvement in the intentions behind his actions. Let's quickly go through some things Reigen does after this point to illustrate this. In the episode just after his character arc ends, Reigen helps Mob train for his school marathon. Obviously Reigen doesn't have much to gain from this, but his assistance, while likely necessary, does help support Mob to try his best. What's most notable about this to me is that it's clearly different from the things Reigen would do before his arc. He actively takes an interest in supporting Mob's growth rather than trying to limit it. We also see Reigen's sacrificial side develop more. During the World Domination arc, Reigen helps hide Mob from the hulking psychic Shibata while he is still waking up. Reigen is putting himself in danger here for Mob's sake, and it does indeed help Mob get enough time to stay safe. I think another noticeable thing here is that Reigen's newfound care for others doesn't just apply to Mob. After the Claw arc concludes, he also offers Serizawa, the awkward but also powerful psychic, a position as a staff member for his spirit in such company. Reigen does of course have a lot to gain from having more staff there, but he's already got Mob's help and could very easily leave Serizawa to fall back into his shut-in life. Needless to say, Reigen does indeed still lie to customers about his spiritual ability, and is unfortunately still committing child labour offences. He doesn't suddenly become a morally perfect person overnight, but that's just how people are. However, it's very clear that Reigen's changed a lot since the end of his character arc. He is now a much more caring person, and now that his intent backs up his extremely strong track record, I think it's safe to say that at this point, Reigen truly becomes a genuinely good guy. But this doesn't answer the question of whether or not Reigen was a genuinely good guy at the point where Mob claims he is. What exactly is Mob referring to when he calls Reigen a good person? Does he still believe the lies he's told? Is this about who Reigen is deep down? Is he just talking out his ass to make Reigen feel better? Unfortunately, the only real answer I can give here is that it's ambiguous. However, it does seem to me that Mob comes to realise that Reigen is a conman, seeing as the fact that Mob was monitoring his press conference also implies that he followed the rest of the story. Also, the fact that Mob wasn't willing to forgive Reigen until he made a point of proving that he does care about him as more than just a worker, also shows that Mob is likely aware that Reigen has mistreated him in the past. So why does Mob choose to call him a genuinely good guy? My interpretation here is that Mob recognises that Reigen's starting to change. He's in the process of going from an overly ambitious businessman to a caring and empathetic person, due to recognizing that the thing which ultimately gave his current life more value to him compared to his previous jobs is the relationship he has with Mob. Reigen never suited the role of the endlessly ambitious businessman, but rather he is more disposed to finding satisfaction in caring for the people close to him. When Mob calls Reigen a genuinely good guy, he's saying it in spite of the things Reigen has done in the past, because the change Reigen's going through is making it become a true statement, and the encouragement given here from this line validates Reigen's desire to improve, essentially claiming that it's something that he can manage. If there's one thing to take from this arc, I think it's to learn that we are all capable of improving as people despite everything we've done in the past. And often it's the people around us who can help the most with that. After all, our past is just another characteristic. We must embrace it as a part of ourselves and continue to live positively.
After all, the truth behind one's charm is kindness. So just be a good person. You got it?